Hey guys, this is Christina. At training, we talked about the ABCs of the SPF pie. And so today I'm just going to review briefly the first couple steps. The first of which is assessment. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I talk to a team about assessment, as well as give you a few ideas about how you can 212 it or take it to the next level. So assessment is the first step. That's the A. I usually explain to our teams that they're there for a reason at TI. They're not just there to come up with some sort of social event for their school or their community, but they want to come up with an event or a program that makes a difference. Now remember that this year the theme is be, and so you can tell them that you want them to be the change in their community. You want to give them something that they can do, that they can take back, that will really make a difference. But to do so, they have to identify what problems even exist, and this is the assessment phase. And so what I usually say to them is, how can they expect to have a program or a project that creates positive change if they don't know what the problems are? So we're going to talk about what the problems are. And the first stage is just to identify what are some of the problems. Now, as you know, you'll have some statistics for them to look at. Their adult advisors are there to give some ideas. But I have found that one of the best things is just to ask them, what do they think are the problems in their school or their community or their organization, whatever kind of team that they are. Just let them brainstorm. You don't have to pull out their notebook right away and have them start writing things. Just ask them, just like if you sat down at the lunch table with them. And you could just say, hey, what are the problems that you see, you as a middle school or a high school or a member of this school? What are the problems that you see? And just kind of get them brainstorm, kind of get them thinking. That's what assessment is just identifying what the problems are. One of my favorite aspects of assessment is the but why activity. This is where you can really help drill down to what the actual problem is. Because oftentimes we will identify something as a problem, but that may not be the actual problem. There may be 2 or 3 or 4 steps down a real true underlying problem. And so that's what you're helping them identify. Now, what I like to do is I tell them just to close their notebook. I don't have them open up to the but why worksheet. I just have them close their notebook. And so if we've honed in on a problem, let's say, for example, they say drunk driving is a problem in their community. Then I just say to them, wow, that's really intense. That's a big deal. Why do you think that's a problem? And let them answer that. It's not a formalized thing. It's just like I'm having a conversation with them. I make it fun. I engage with them. So I say, okay, so why is that a problem? And they say, well, we think that drunk driving is a problem because all these parties are always happening at our friends or at people's houses where they have alcohol. They have alcohol and they get in the car and drive home. And I'll say, yikes, wow, that's a big deal. Why do you think that there's parties happening where there's alcohol with minors? And they'll say, well, I really think it's the parents. We just really think the parents don't understand what the true repercussions are. They don't understand what the laws are. They don't see the problem, and so they're giving it to their kids. And then I'll say something like, wow, that's a big deal. Why do you think the parents don't understand? Do they not understand, or do they just not care? And then they'll say something like, well, we really actually just don't think they understand. We don't think they're aware of what could happen to them as well as what could happen to their students by providing minors with alcohol. And so as you see, that is the but why activity, but it was just through a conversation with them. And I do this with the multiple problems that they identified. And then when we're done, I'll say, okay, now open up your notebook and write down, fill in that worksheet, the but why activity, based on what we just talked about. So as you can see, what you're showing them is if drunk driving in this example is the problem, they don't need to come up with a program or some sort of initiative that tells youth about the dangers of drunk driving, because that's not really the problem. The problem in that example is the parent, and the parent's not understanding why it's such a big deal to provide minors with alcohol. And so that's 2 totally different programs for them to do. And through the but why activity, you've helped them identify where really that they should focus. So that's assessment. Again, it's just helping them figure out what's going on in our community, and what path do we want to walk down. There's lots of different options. Let's figure out which one we want to focus on. So that's assessment. That's the A. Now the B and C, if you remember, is building capacity, or some people say capacity building. but it works when our ABCs to say building capacity. Now, that's kind of a scary phrase. If you sit down with your team and say, now we're going to talk about capacity building, you can imagine for most of them, if they've never heard of that, they just shut you out because that's like, whoa, I don't know what those words mean. Those sound fancy and doesn't sound fun. And so what I explain to them is I say, hey, this is something really cool and really different. And I love to think about capacity building. You kind of just get their attention that way. And I always say, this is sort of a flip-flopped way of thinking about what kind of project you want to do. Now that you've identified a problem, which we did in assessment, or a few problems, instead of just coming up with a project and then trying to find the resources to make it happen, which we may or may not have, let's start with identifying the resources. And they're going to kind of scratch their head and look at you. And so you say, I give them an example and I say, if you've got this great music venue in your community or this great park or whatever that might be, what would it look like if you built your project around that venue because you know that you have that venue available to you? Doesn't that make more sense than just deciding that you want to have a big ice skating event and then realizing that there's not an ice skating rink anywhere close to you? So I kind of explain it to them that way, and I say, this is just a different way of looking at things. And then I invite them, I ask them, I say, hey, I know this is different. Will you just entertain this for a few minutes? Will you just play along? This may seem different than what you're used to, but will you just try it? And I get them to audibly and physically say, yeah, we'll just try that, kind of get that buy-in. Another thing to remember about capacity building, and that I always remind my teams, is that you've got to think about people and not just items or venues, those sort of things. It's really easy to start naming, well, we have these restaurants and we have this music venue in this park or this community center, whatever it might be, and those are very, very important. But people often forget about people, that people are resources as well. And so that means their team members, to think about what skills and what talents each team member has, as well as the people around them, maybe the principal of their school or the director of their community organization or the pastor at their church or whatever that might be. Really encourage them to think creatively about that. And so you have them brainstorm, and so you end up with this list of all kinds of resources, people and venues and all sorts of things. One of my most favorite things to do, and this would be a way to 212 this brainstorm, if you have time, make sure you keep an eye on the clock. I sort of play a little game with them, and I'll look at their list, and hopefully, you've got it on a whiteboard or chalkboard, or maybe just on their, in front of them on a piece of paper. And I will pick out maybe 2, maybe 3 of the things that they've listed that probably don't relate at all. For example, let's say they have on there that they have a roller skating rink. And they also have a member of their team that has a really good voice, or that's a songwriter or something like that. Well, I'll say, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick out a couple, and the first person that can think of a project that uses those 2 or those 3 resources that also answers the problem that they identified in the assessment phase, first person raise their hand and share what their project would be and be creative, think out of the wall. And so, for instance, in that example, I'll say, hey, the skating rink and, John over here that's a singer-songwriter, and our problem is drunk driving, go. And then, someone might raise their hand and say, well, we can have a roller skating, sing-off or singer-songwriting competition where they have to write songs about the repercussions of providing alcohol to minors or something like that. Something just off the wall. It can be something totally crazy. Let them have fun with that. Make it challenging. Pick things that they just can't imagine you'd ever put together for an actual project, and let them just start brainstorming things like that. It just gets their wheels turning, and probably while they do that, they might come up with more resources to add to their list for capacity building. So that's assessment and capacity building. Hope that was helpful. Looking forward to seeing you guys at TI.